So, here we are together. Just a quick announcement. In the past 2 or 3 years, Awakening Together has hosted me, but due to time restraints, I thought that we'd start doing the hosting ourselves for the Sunday meetings and the Wednesday meetings, so that I can be in charge of the time and go on a little bit longer. So the plan now is for us to meet for an hour or an hour and 15 minutes. I'll do my best to not go beyond that. But I just wanted to have a little bit extra time, and it was really nice being a part of the Awakening Together community. But like I said, due to time restraints, I thought I'd mix things up a little bit, take charge. The other thing is just a big heartfelt thank you, truly, from everyone out there offering the ongoing support. That's been deeply helpful, especially in this time. So I think that's all the announcements there. I have a bunch of questions, and of course, any of you who are live today, I'd be happy to speak with you. If you have a question, what would be helpful is you can kind of raise your hand and wave at me, and I can try to find you that way. The other thing is if you go down to the bottom of the screen and just put it in the chat, just say your name and that you have a question. And in regards to questions, just try to be very succinct with what you're asking. A lot of people a lot of people get really confused when they start talking with me. And one of the things I think that happens is due to discernment, they don't know what it is they're actually asking for. And so oftentimes they overwhelm me with, really long emails and details. But if you just find the heart of your question, become really clear about what it is that I'm actually asking, then it can become quite simple. And it's in no way do I want you to think that I'm dismissing the details of your life, but my teacher used to do this funny thing with me where I would go on and on with him explaining the great complexity, of my current life drama. And, at some point he would just say, like, Craig, knock it off, like, just stop. I'd say, no, you don't understand. But if I just, listened to his response, I saw, oh, he did understand. I was the one who was becoming anxious and felt like every detail needed to be spoken. But the human life, the human experience, like our struggles, our pain, our confusion, again, not to be dismissive, but oftentimes they're so basic what we struggle with. And I'm not saying that your troubles are basic. Your troubles are my troubles. Anything that anyone has ever brought me, I've found that same thing within myself along the path. And, the truth is basic. The truth is simple. It's our egoic nature that trips over the complexity. And so it's important to acknowledge this and to humble oneself. To say, oh yeah, it's probably not as complicated as I'm making it out to be. I could just do this or do that, and this whole, house of cards would crumble, and the truth would present itself. So why don't we do this just before we get into to all the questions? Is let's just close our eyes and begin to remember who we are. Who is it that's here this evening, that is awake, that is aware? Who is the Holy One in the room? And please, I invite you to include yourself in that question, not just the teacher, but yourself, please. Who's the Holy One? Right here, right now. Who is it that's here that's radiant, luminous, and beautiful? Who is it that is vast and spacious and free in the beginning, the middle, and the end of this thing called life? Who is it that's awake, aware, and free in this moment? And I invite you to breathe into that, to feel the absolute silence at the depth of that question. Who is it that's here that is a Buddha, the awakened one? It's a goddess. Is not that the very one who hears the sound of my voice? You must be awake to hear, to look, to witness, to experience. And so again, let's just breathe into that for a moment. This breathing, feeling. Opening to the one who's awake, who's aware, who's divine, who's mighty. Who is the one that's here right now, who's outlived every experience you've ever had? Good, bad, ugly, difficult, ecstatic, blissful, harsh, critical, difficult, painful. Who's here? What presence is here that is literally indestructible? Can you acknowledge this? Can you acknowledge this? Again, just breathing in, breathing out. What's here that can witness anxiety, pain, pleasure, bliss, sadness, old age, young age, the middle school years? What's here that outlived middle school, high school? Our parents, what's here that's outlived our upbringing? And again, just feeling into the quiet strength of the presence that you are. The quiet strength. And I encourage you, as I shift into responding to the questions, just to stay with this. What's here? The one thing I'd like to speak about tonight is about the power of awakening. And by the power of awakening, I'm not just speaking about one moment in history when we wake up to the fullness of our nature. But what I'd like to speak about is the power inherent in awakening. If you claim your divinity, if you claim your power, if you claim the I, if you claim awareness, which seems kind of paradoxical because you must be aware to be aware. You begin to see that when you give your power away, you fall asleep. So when you believe a thought that is not true, you give your power away. When you believe an experience has more power than you do, you give yourself away literally. You say, I am that which can be overwhelmed. I am that which is anxious. If you believe that thought and identify with that, you will suffer. But rather, if you choose to be the presence that witnesses anxiety or fear or guilt, and then turn around and look at the one who witnesses, claim that power and say, yes, this is me. I am not the feelings, I am not the thoughts, I am that which witnesses the thoughts. If you want to be awake, if you want to become enlightened, you must claim your power. There's no other way. Without your power, you will always be at the mercy of how you're feeling. You'll be at the mercy of thoughts that come and go. You'll be at the mercy of how other people treat you. You'll be at the mercy of outside forces. And so there is this basic truth on the path of spiritual awakening. If you want to be awake, you have to claim what you are. Step into it and say, I am the awakened one. I'm the one who can see anxiety, fear, guilt, shame, anger. And therefore I have power over it. I see the addiction. I have power over the addiction. But as soon as you buy into an addiction and say the addiction has power over me, you prostitute yourself. You sell yourself out. You sell yourself for a cheap price. You don't get anything out of the deal but suffering. So I encourage you all to exercise your power. I see my emotions, therefore I am not my emotions. I see my thoughts, I therefore am not my thoughts. I'd like to share one of my favorite verses from an old song. And it's in response to this question that someone asked me this week. It's a brilliant question. And the question is, what is ego? What actually is the ego? I thought, boy, that's a great question. Something that sometimes we just gloss over. We act like we know what ego is. And especially in spiritual circles, we think the ego is something just terribly bad and we must get rid of it. But I'd like just to read this verse. It's about desire. I'm sure you'll know who this is. If you're old enough, you'll know who this is. Someone told me there's a girl out there with love in her eyes and flowers in her hair. And I'll read the whole verse. I spent my days with a woman unkind. I smoked my stuff and I drank all my wine. Made up my mind to make a new start. I'm going to California with an aching in my heart. And this song, touches me so much because, it's about desire. It's basically the pleasure-pain principle. At first he's with an unkind woman, and so of course he wants to run from her. And so he tries addiction. He tries smoking and drinking. And then at some point that got old. And he made up his mind to make a new start. So he had a flash of insight. Then followed by his flash of insight was a fantasy. And, when I was young, I had this fantasy as well, to go to California. I definitely had an aching heart. That's the desire mind, which makes up ego, a huge chunk of ego. is made up of this aching heart. It's an aching heart that's looking for a fantasy. Someone told me there's a girl out there with love in her eyes and flowers in her hair. And of course there is a girl out there with love in her eyes and flowers in her hair. But oftentimes we know how this is, love with another oftentimes is fleeting. Of course, flowers in the hair, that's kind of the hippie dream, the hippie fantasy. And that we'll go to California and we'll just, live in a van on the beach for the rest of our life. And so the ego, what is the ego? The ego is this thing that seeks pleasure and avoids pain at all cost. And it's a program that was put literally into your body. So as soon as you incarnated, when you're a soul, you're pure consciousness. But as you incarnate into form, you're given a body. And it's a body that has a program. And the program is very much like a computer virus. A virus that just takes over your computer and just keeps giving you those pop-ups. And so when we're young, I guess also when we're old, our mind gives us this pop-up all the time about fantasies. I'm going to go somewhere where there'll be the easy life and I'll just be eternally loved. I'll just experience pleasure from now and into infinity. And I won't suffer. That's the fantasy that the ego is always presenting to us. And the ego, it's not a bad thing. Of course, if you seek pleasure and avoid pain at all costs, that will also keep you alive. It'll keep you out of danger. If you're avoiding pain at all costs, seeking pleasure, at least you'll be fed, and you'll have a warm home in theory, and this and that. And so it's wired into the biological nature. It's not a bad thing. It's simply a program. That's all the ego is. And, at the root of it is an evolutionary impulse to grow. To grow. And so in this line he said, Robert Plant, I guess, said, I made up my mind to make a new start. So that's the evolutionary impulse, which is inherent in ego. And of course, if you look at that evolutionary impulse even deeper, there's a desire to be free. That's what that impulse arises out of. So even inherent within the ego itself is the desire to be free. The desire to be free is very similar to the pleasure principle. If just not wanting to suffer, but wanting to experience a greater life, greater pleasure, greater pleasure. But, if we just filter it through the biological nature, if the ego stops at that level of development, I can tell you a story about a goat I had once, to bring up something bizarre. If you ever owned goats, goats can literally eat themselves to death. They can just eat and eat and eat, and they get this thing called bloat, and their stomach just starts, basically exploding. And it's a terrible thing, but you have to shove a tube down their throat to alleviate some of the gases in their stomach so they don't just die from eating so much food. That would be the sin called gluttony. A sin is when you give in to a desire, to such a degree that it starts to harm you or greatly harms you. And so oftentimes on the spiritual path, when we're speaking about ego, we're speaking about a repetition of habits to the point of them harming you. There's nothing wrong with Robert Plant, wanting to go to California and find a girl with love in her eyes and a flower in her hair. There's nothing wrong with looking for love. It only becomes a problem when we ignore the love of our own heart and give our power away and expect the woman, with the love in her eyes to provide it for us. If we want to be free, we must find the love within us. We must fall in love with ourselves first and foremost. If we want to be free, we have to put our desires in check and just not let them run us astray. We have to put our emotions in check. We have to put gluttony in check. Like with these goats that I had once upon a time. This is many years ago. It's funny talking about goats. They didn't have good self-awareness. They didn't have a sense of mindfulness. And so their ego would just run out of control, and then they'd literally die from gluttony of all things. And so the ego can get us in all types of trouble if we don't invite for it to be upgraded in a way that's in alignment with a greater truth. So not just the truth of the body, which is I want, sense pleasures and lots of food. We're inviting something greater in this life. And so if we invite something greater, then we have to be willing to put down the limited ego and step into an unlimited consciousness. And that's what this path is about. So it's about stepping out of that which is limited and that which is biological. Stepping out of the habitual, responsive ego. And stepping into what the Buddha called prajna, heart wisdom, intuitive guidance. Which is a greater intelligence, greater truth. But in order to do this, we have to let go of the thinking mind. We have to let go of our story. We have to fall out of love with our story and fall in love with ourself. And as we do this, we outgrow ego for the most part. There's always going to be a little shred of ego there in case you come in contact with a axe murderer or a mountain lion. I'm trying to think of some dangerous things, but or the coronavirus. It's good to have an ego around the coronavirus, which will tell you, yeah, if you're going shopping, maybe wear a mask and wash your hands afterwards. But you don't need to shop in fear. Okay, so great question. So Richard has a question. So yeah, Richard, what would you like to ask today?
Yeah, my question is around the fact that the mind is constantly building images of reality and interacting with those, and, as opposed to reality itself.
Yeah,
Just see myself running into this constantly,
yeah,
and my question is around um, both how to work with this skillfully, and I'm also curious at your stage of awakening what that looks like for you. Is that gone entirely? Do you still find yourself tripping up with that, especially with very close people in your life? So I'm curious about that as well.
yeah. So you're asking basically about the self-fabricating nature of mind.
Yes, go for that.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've learned on the path is if I make my mind or my ego the enemy, I'm gonna have a long war. If you look at the country Afghanistan, Afghanistan's been at war, uh, just I guess since its history. They call it the what do they call it? Something about Afghanistan. I think they call it the like the burial ground of empires. Because so many great empires have come to fight with the Afghans, and the Afghans just keep fighting, year after year, and they just never give up. But then if you look at Afghan society, you just live in an eternal state of war. And so the children there, they never get to develop. They never really get to go to school long term because they're always fighting. And then they have never have much of a life. And I realized this, at some point, actually pretty far along on the spiritual path, that I was fighting with my mind. I was trying to make my mind silent. And the mind is not supposed to be silent. So one of the qualities of ego is its self-fabricating nature. It's always fabricating images, new ideas, um, whether it's grand ideas or we're dwelling on the past or dwelling on the future. And if you fight with that, the same way, say, your parents fought with it, basically you'll just repeat their past. If dad was an alcoholic, you tend to become an alcoholic. If, mom was anxious, you tend to become anxious, or, whatever the play was, within the family system, we tend to repeat that. And so what I realized is, one, it was fascinating just to sit back from mindfulness and just to notice, oh, the mind is always creating. It's eternally creating. If I'm inherently angry or if my life is a mess, my mind is just going to start, it's going to play with the mess of my life. And it's going to create terrible scenarios in my head. Like if I was a lawyer, I would have terrible scenarios in my head all day long of all the people I'd be fighting with, all my cases for the week. If you have a very dramatic life, the mind will take the contents of your outward drama and just replay it over and over and over again. And so there's something about just having a simple life with no drama. And my little brother, God bless him, I've gotten in a lot of trouble in my life. My little brother has gotten in a tremendous amount of trouble. A tremendous amount of trouble. And at some point, we got a little bit older and we were talking to each other. And he looked at me, and I've told the story before, but he said, what I've learned is I just really want a boring life. And I like boring because boring is synonymous with simple. Like my life is very simple. If I keep my life simple and not busy, not overstimulated, then my mind will rest in silence much more easily. Like Denny's listening in too, and I think me and Denny are a lot alike. We love living in nature. We love being in nature. We love being outside. And when you go outside, there's not much going on. It's just big, beautiful sky, mountains, trees blowing in the wind. Gosh, I wanted to see if I can get this poem. Um, anyways, it's not a time for this poem, but there's this Zen poet, and Sky Above Great Wind, Roykon, and he has all these just really simple haikus, and when you read his poetry, you get a sense of what his life was like. Very simple, very basic. So the more simple your life is, your mind won't have much to play with. And I'll say this, if in the simplicity you give yourself permission to fall in love with the silence, to fall in love with the peace, to fall in love with the freedom. And so one of the things that I noticed is, the ego is inherently attached to life's drama, life's confusion, life's struggle. In a sense, that's one of the great programs within the ego is to sort out life, to sort out problems. That's what the ego does all day long. But if you just step out of the sorting out, step out of the fixing mind, and just allow mind to expand, instead of mind, you know, focusing all its energy on being creative, and by being creative, I mean, creatively talking about all your life's dramas and confusions and pain. What I do is I allow that same energy, that wants to go outward, say into my life and figure things out. I've invited it to say spread out horizontally. And so what the mind is doing is it's ever expanding. And so that's its job. It's to ever expand, to become drunk on itself. To fabricate, spaciousness or freedom. Fabricate's the wrong word, but I think you know what I mean, is it just, you give it permission to go this way. And so what that requires is that we fall in love with the space in which thought arises. Most people are in love with thought itself. Or I'll even say it differently. They're in a love-hate relationship with it, one of those terrible relationships where it's I love you, I hate you, I love you, I hate you. And so we're playing that game of, you know, always fighting with each other, but you really love each other, but it's a sick kind of love. And so that's the type of relationship most people have with their ego. And what I done, like say if the drama's happening right here, what I did is I just basically took my eyes off this and then I just looked up there. And as I did that, my mind started to feel a sense of relief, and there was a sense of like, wow, oh my gosh, the sky is so big. I am so big. And so that pleasure pain principle, instead of just like sitting here and like fighting and living in hell, like the mind inherently wants to be free. But when the mind begins to wake up and realize, oh, I can look up here and freedom feels good, and freedom feels good over here too, and freedom feels good behind me as well, the mind falls in love with freedom. I could even say it differently. When the ego knows that the only true relief is not in finding a girl in California with love in her eyes and flowers in her hair, but that when the ego realizes it can fall in love with freedom and it can let go into that, it can trust in that, it's this great turning point that happens inside. It's like being an old man and saying, oh yeah, I can retire. I don't have to work my whole life. I can retire in this freedom. And I like retirement. I like retirement. The mind itself loves retirement. But you have to show it what retirement's like, and you have to walk through that transition. I've walked a lot of people through the transition of retirement, and the first thing they start to feel is anxious. They're like, oh, I don't know, like, what am I going to do if I'm not busy every day of my life? Like, well, let's just see. Like, let's just go outside and see what's here. And they go out, so they get a little anxious, but then they get a little more anxious. Then they start taking some deep breaths, and they're like, oh yeah, I really like this. I really like this. And so then the mind falls in love with itself, not in an ego way, but in a capital S way, capital self way. And then what you find is when you do start to pick up those thoughts again, you immediately notice, oh, this feels like hell. And it feels like hell viscerally in the body. And even the ego will say, oh, this feels like hell. I don't like this. I want to step back into this. I want to step back into this. And then what you find there, when we open to this type of space, we realize there's a different kind of mind that comes forward. And again, prajna, it's heart wisdom. The heart will come forward with very simple thoughts, very basic thoughts. And so I'll say this, it is very rare that I'm ever deeply confused about anything. And I'm not saying that because I'm really bright. It's rather because I'm really simple. Like there's not much to be confused about. And life is very basic. If you go off course, you start to feel anxious, you start to suffer. If you stay on course by listening to the basic heart wisdom oftentimes will just be like, go this way. Okay. And so then you start falling in love with this different kind of mind, and you'll find it's just really silent. It just thinks when you need to think. You don't really need to think about much. I rarely think about anything. That sounds stupid, but that's just. Oh yeah, I rarely think about anything. Like I was with my little girl today, and we were hanging out down by the river, and she said, "Dad, what are you thinking about?" I was like, "Thinking about nothing." That's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about nothing. And but we've trained our mind to always be thinking about something. But I like falling in love with nothing. And when you fall in love with nothing, it's like something happens with that energy that's always fabricating. At night we might call it the dream weaver that's always weaving dreams. But when you give yourself permission to fall in love with nothing, what happens is the energy of fabrication, it turns into the energy of expansion. That's what I wanted to say before. It just starts expanding more and more and more. And of course, inherent in that is great freedom and great contentment. And as that contentment begins to overtake you, then it starts to snowball. The same way the ego can just like snowball itself out of control, and you can build up this whole illusion of who and what you are and this identity and everything. The energy of awakening, it snowballs into this presence where, um, well, it's just wonderful. That's all I'll say is it's just wonderful. And then as soon as you step out of it, you'll feel it as immediate suffering, and you'll say, okay, I must be confused about something. And can I just look clearly and simply? What is it I'm confused about? And oftentimes, as soon as you look at it, the truth presents itself. That's how prajna is. The truth just presents itself. And in that, there's really no thinking. It's like, okay, I need to adjust my behavior, or I need to step away, or whatever it is. And so there's still growth, but the growth is real simple. It's not like great struggle unless you actively choose. I'll be colorful here, to be an idiot, unless you're actively choosing to be an idiot, which I've done in the past. Oftentimes that's tied into habit, is we actively choose to be an idiot. Or it's tied into habit. And if you stop and look at that, from kindness, not calling yourself an idiot, what you'll see is anything that you struggle with that's habitual is a place you've given your power away. And the awakened energy of the heart actually gets excited to see anywhere where you gave your power away, because then it says, oh, this place here needs to be liberated. I need to get my power back out of this experience. And so then your heart becomes happy to find the places where you're still deluded, because it's like, oh, you know, if you ever see like these kids who play these video games, I was thinking about this one video game that a young kid showed me recently, Subway Surfer. It's like you're running and you run and you get coins as you're running. And when you get the coins, you become more empowered. And the same thing is true. It's like when you find a shadow, when you find a place of confusion, and you see it, you can reach into that shadow and you gather coins, you gather gold, you gather your power back. And then you become more awakened. And so you see that, if you trip over something, there's not even that internal critic that's like, oh no, I shouldn't have that. There's a sense of, oh yes, I'm so happy to have found this. Because now I know when I reach into this space, I'll actually feel more expanded, more free. as a result of looking at pain, embracing pain. That's why I'm such a big fan of embracing pain, because inherent in any struggle that we have is basically energy. It's like fuel is there. And so if we feel a little bit awake right now, then there's a good chance that there's this whole reservoir of fuel in your unconscious. And so that's why I'm such a big fan of like the work I do in my individual sessions or inquiry work, or where you're going and you're looking in saying like, where am I tight? Where am I tense? Where am I holding back? And you see there's fuel there in those places that could be harvested. It's one way to put it. So anyways, great question, Richard. Was that at all helpful?
That was incredibly helpful. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, of course, of course. Um, Thanks for being courageous enough and to ask a question. So anyone else is welcome. Just bring it forward in the chat here. Okay, let's see here. Here's a more of a comment than a question. I believe this one's from Melanie. I think it's Melanie. Uh, she writes, Craig, I have had a rough journey in the last months, and am still in the midst of huge uncertainty and inner pain. I recall your words, healing is messy, and many other things you said in the session. I just wanted to comment about the healing is messy part. A lot of spiritual people are, they do the spiritual path, they walk the spiritual path from the perspective of the ego, which says, I only want to feel good and I don't want to feel bad. But again, if we want to step beyond ego, if we want to upgrade the ego, we have to be willing to live in a way that's not egocentric. And so, I just like to think of, healing in the same way I think of as, child rearing. If there's a child who's crying, we walk in the direction of the crying child. We don't walk away from the crying child. The ego would walk away from pain. But as an open-hearted Buddha, if that's what we want to be, if we want to be Christ-like consciousness, we walk toward pain. We walk toward the mess. And keep in mind, we walk toward the mess first, with clarity, with mindfulness, so we don't get lost in the mess, and with love. And then thirdly, strength. So if we're going to embrace something that's messy, we need clarity that knows I am. I'm the awakened one here. I'm the adult in the room. Like when you're dealing with the 5-year-old, I'm the adult in the room. And so that's the clarity. And the love, you look at the mess with love. You don't look at a mess with judgment, because then you'll just spin in the story. And so we have clarity, we have love, and then the strength is a willingness to sit with the mess and to see it through, to say, let's see, like, what is this really about? What is my part in this mess? What is their part? Are we both in delusion here? Is this that love-hate relationship thing going on? Why am I tripping over this mess? Am I willing to get my hands dirty? And that's what God is asking of us, in our incarnation, is, hey, I want you to go down there. I want you to get a little dirty, but I want you ultimately to grow and embody and shine your light into this world. That's what this world is. It's an evolutionary world. It's a world of growth. Evolution is messy. Healing is messy. Transformation is messy. There's no 1, 2, 3 steps to enlightenment. And so, what happened here? Did I lose everybody? I think I still have y'all on Facebook, but I guess the others live stream. Looks like it crashed. So anyways, I'm going to look into some of these questions here on the Facebook live stream. See if I can get this computer to boot up again. Is it possible for some guidance on Shaktipat transmission? This is from Alex. Yeah, Alex, that's a great question. You know, one of the things about Shaktipat, you know, for those of you who don't know, that Shaktipat is a very powerful transmission that, you know, happens oftentimes through a guru. Of course, it can come from God as well, where all of a sudden we're blessed with the force of awakening, the force of kundalini. And, you know, one of the problems with Shaktipat is oftentimes people aren't ready for it. It's too much too quick. Um, they tend to be overwhelmed by that experience. So I normally don't recommend it. Um, and a lot of people have come to me because they've received Shaktipat and then, you know, their whole life was turned upside down and this and that. I've had many, many people who I've met with who had this experience. And so, um, you know, I normally don't recommend it. You know, what my sense about it is Shaktipat will happen when the student is ready. It will happen naturally. You know, where you won't need a guru to touch you on your third eye or something like that, where God will touch you. And so I encourage, I encourage people not to seek it. You know, if you live in an ashram and you're living with a guru and you have your teacher there, that's great. And that's a part of your path and beautiful. Um, but if it's just something you're going to try on a Sunday morning, you know, first time visiting the guru, you know, it could lead to a lot of trouble because oftentimes it's too much too quick. You know, I think it's important that we have an appropriate build up, that we're grounded in meditation, grounded in yoga, that we're mature on the path before we ask for such a thing. So I hope that was helpful. Okay, here's a question from Kate. Hi, Craig. Would I tell someone who I think the question is, what do I tell someone who is in Kundalini crisis and doesn't feel they can go on, who's grieving a life they feel is gone and is utterly exhausted, trying to provide hope to a friend and also me too? You know, oftentimes, Kate, just a willingness to listen deeply to the person struggling, to listen deeply. You know, so instead of telling them anything, oftentimes it's a willingness to listen from a place of love, to listen and not feel like you have to solve their life or, you know, fix them or heal them. But oftentimes when people are in deep crisis and they don't want to go on, what they really need is just to be heard. To be heard. Oftentimes when someone brings up suicide and, you know, the counselor might get really anxious, talking about all these great reasons why you should go on living, but normally what the person needs is just to be heard and to acknowledge that, gosh, this is really hard. And so to validate their suffering, validate that it's difficult. Validate is different than agreeing with them, you know, that they should end their life or anything like that. Um, you know, so if someone says, you know, like, I've had enough, I just want to end my life, you can just acknowledge, like, gosh, like, must be really hard what you're going through. But just to listen from a place of peace. The more relaxed that you are inside, the more quickly they'll feel deeply validated and heard and loved. And that will create a space of healing in the air. That will create a space of healing in the air. And so, Um, anyways, I hope that was helpful. Here's a question from Lee. Oh, Lee's just telling me I really like the way you're speaking. Okay, well, thanks, Lee. Excuse me. I have a couple questions more that were emailed in here. Let me see if I can pull them up. Um, Craig, I just wanted to let you know that our discussion and my change in internal orientation seems to have set in motion some things that maybe I have been avoiding, and so I have made some progress with them and sat with a lot of uncomfortable sensations over the last few days. However, this has definitely made me feel ungrounded. Are you able to suggest anything to help with this? Yeah, so oftentimes on the path, healing can be, like I was saying before, healing can be quite messy. It can be quite, it can be ungrounding at times. The big thing that you have to have on the path is just a sense of clarity that that I'll get through this. You have to have a sense of faith that I will get through this, that I will heal, that that there's a quiet strength within me. So if you feel ungrounded, if you feel lost, if you feel confused, if you feel that you're tripping over yourself, if you feel anxious, we must have faith in the quiet knowingness that I'm a spiritual man, and I will get through this. That the truth is within me, the light is within me, the clarity is within me, and sorry about that, everyone. Hearing my other computer restart, but we want to step into this strength, this power, whenever we feel ungrounded. The very feeling of being ungrounded forces us to find our strength. And so that's what this experience in life is inviting you to grow into something greater. And that's what my challenge is to you, is to grow into something greater. With our discussion, it's a challenge to grow into something greater. And so often on the path, when we feel, say for example, ungrounded, the ego starts to swirl. It feels like, oh, I'm out of control. I can't handle this. This is too much. But your job is to claim your truth and to say, no, I am strong. I'm awake. I see clearly what's happening. I'm growing. I'm changing. I'm transforming. I'm just feeling a little bit ungrounded. That's all there is to it. It's just a feeling. This feeling will come and this feeling will go. It will come and it will go. But my job is to live in the truth. To live in the truth. And so call upon your strength. Call upon it. Get rooted in it. Oftentimes, if you want something practical, just going outside, walking in nature, walking barefoot, not believing any of your thoughts, not believing the sensations, but just pulling all your energy to the center and saying, yes, I am this quiet strength. I'm not crazy. I'm not losing my mind. This is just a passing difficulty. That's all it is. And to stay true to this basic fact that you're not crazy. You're the one who's awake, who's aware. And when I say you're not crazy, oftentimes when we feel ungrounded, the system starts to feel overwhelmed, and we start to have a fear of going crazy, or I'm losing my mind, or this is too much, or oh my gosh, I feel like a wave is going to crash over me. So many times in life I said, let that wave crash over me, and I let it. And I noticed it didn't kill me, it didn't destroy me. And so, anyways, that's a great question. Um, okay, here's a question from Andy. Andy writes, Craig, once you said that on your path you have faced many years of intense physical pain. Yes, I have. I actually still deal with intense physical pain because I have a head injury where I really cracked my noggin. Almost died in a whitewater rafting accident, and I still deal with that. So, uh, anyways, so the question goes on. I face a similar thing. Since more than a year, I have this strange inflammation in my jaw, which doctors just don't understand and can't cure. They really tried so much. Doesn't give me It doesn't give me pain, but almost an unbearable, rotten taste 24/7. This is a fun one. More and more, I lose hope that this will ever stop, and I just don't succeed in embracing and allowing God's will in this. Do you have any advice? Yeah, I'll say this, Andy. Again, of course, I can't diagnose you, for having a rotten taste in your mouth. But I have heard this before, especially in regards to kundalini. So I'll say this. So when there's issues going on with the jaw, oftentimes it has to do uh, with our throat chakra. And oftentimes with the throat chakra, um, it has to do with judgment and criticism. So if we have a strong internal judge or critic, um, we can have pain in the throat chakra. We can have weird sensations. We can have strange taste. A lot of people do this thing where they're like swallowing, and they're having trouble with the swallow response. And so oftentimes the throat chakra has to do with having a strong internal critic, which must be met with love if you want it to heal. Or it also could have to do with something with expression. And so if it's purely psychosomatic, I would encourage you to look at those two places. Is there something that needs to be expressed? Um, is there something that wants to come out? Do I have a strong internal critic? Is my body trying to detox something and I'm having trouble letting go? Hence the rotten taste. But again, before you just solely go on my advice, I encourage you to meet with an acupuncturist, a naturopath. There's a lot of weird things that happen in the body that aren't healed with Western medicine that can be quickly healed with acupuncture. And by quickly healed with acupuncture, I mean you might need to go 5 or 6 times to acupuncture and and see what happens. See if that's helpful. Um, they might tell you have too much wind spleen chi or something like that. They might be something out of my expertise. But if it's a throat chakra issue, that's where I would start. But also, I definitely go to an acupuncturist and a naturopath, and of course look at diet and all that stuff. When people say they go to they've been to doctors, I normally don't trust doctors. No offense, any doctors listening, but I like to look at the body from more of a holistic perspective and not just throw medication at it. It could have something to do with your gut health, but again, please ask someone um, who can help you out with that. Okay, let's see what else here. Any other questions before we're done today? And of course, any last minute Facebook ones, please bring it up. And I apologize for those who I lost on um, the Zoom broadcast tonight. I think my second computer may be on its way out, so it might be an expensive week for me getting a new computer here, a new Imac. So, anyways, I apologize for that technological glitch on Zoom. Okay, here's the question. Um, Hello, Craig. I'm beginning to feel profound freedom. I feel that soon I'm going to sink into an abyss. I'm surrendering and relaxing more and more, but then this feeling fades away. Um, yeah, so I'm going to encourage you to reflect what I said upon earlier in the broadcast. When we start to awaken, it's important that we fall in love with the awakening. That we fall in love in a way that we're not grasping at, but rather, just like smiling and surrendering into. And so when we start to awaken to something, it's important that we give it our full attention. Just smile and say, this is good. Not, oh, I want more of this, I need this, I have to have this is my one and only chance, so not that game. But to smile at it, like when you fall in love with someone, you look at them and you smile more, and you give them your full attention. So spiritual awakening is the same way. It's the same way. So if you start to wake up, we smile at this, and we give it our attention. This game that I used to play, when I first started waking up, I was talking to my teacher Ajay, and he said, basically he said something like, what's here all the time? I said, there's peace here, there's spaciousness here. And he said, good. Place your attention there. And so that's all I did, is I just placed my attention there. And then if the awakening started to fade, I placed my attention back on the peace and the silence, which are always here. Like silence is always here. Even if there's a loud barking dog, the dog is barking within the space of silence. So I focus on the silence. Of course, spaciousness is always here. So I focus on the spaciousness. And so as I focus on that, spaciousness expands. It becomes more alive, or at least more alive to me, because I'm realizing it's here. What a lot of people do is when they start to wake up and then it fades, they start attacking themselves, judging themselves, blaming themselves. But as you wake up, you place your attention on that which is waking up, the qualities of awakening. And don't go into your critical mind and say, it's not here, it's not here, it's not here. There's never been a moment in history when peace, silence, spaciousness was not present. I mean, it's the very fabric of the universe. You just go outside and look at the sky. Spaciousness is here. If you look at the space within the room that you're in, space is here. Silence is here. And that space and that silence is inherently free. And if you want to bring love into the equation, which of course is nice, you notice that space and silence are radiant. They're subtly radiating with light. Subtly radiating with light. You see, that light is love, that the very fabric of creation, of my own self, even of my ego, is made of light, love, spaciousness. this quiet intelligence. And so I encourage you to play with this. To play with this. Okay. Now one last one we'll do. Again from Kate. Craig, if not one else has one, not sure what that means. I'll ask a good question about weirdness. When I wake up, I feel like I am in a nebulous void and have to construct myself back together in order to survive and to get work done. Is this common? Not sure how to balance the expansion with the survival needs. Yeah, well, let's talk about the expansion and the survival needs. Um, Gosh, I can go into the nebulous void right now and just disappear. But when my belly gets hungry, I eat. It goes back to living simply. If you trust in the void, you see, the void is just space. We're all walking around in space. It's not dangerous. It's not bad. It's not here to destroy us or anything like that. It's just like fish are in water. They don't realize it, but if they did, they'd notice, oh my gosh, there's so much water here. There's so much water. I'll get lost in this water. But then at some point, their belly gets hungry. They say, I want something to eat. I want something to eat. And so, in regards to survival, hopefully we all live in a world now where we're not, being bombed and things like that. Maybe some of us are, over in the Middle East or something, but most of us, our survival is very basic. Is can you do your gift in the world? Share your gift in the world. Kate, one of your gifts is creativity. And so, can you allow your heart to wake up in this void? And allow your creativity to shine, to create, to build, to make. And let that guide you forward in a loving way, not in an anxious way. I'm going to invite you to take the word survival off the table. And to see that the void is the very space in which life takes place. And just let life move through you. So it doesn't have to be so dramatic, but there's just a basic intelligence to life. That will tell you, go this way or go that way. Go this way or go that way. To listen to your basic heart wisdom. The intelligence of the void is it's showing you that there's tremendous space here and freedom here. Okayness that's here. And within that okayness is a quiet intelligence. And so we don't need to think about our life too hard. But the question is can we listen to the quiet intelligence of our heart? Of our heart. And so that's probably a good place to end. So again, I apologize for those of you on Zoom. Looks like my computer crashed, and I had a tech guy look at it, and he said I need a new Imac, and so I guess I have to get one this week. So I'll have it sorted, as they say in England. I'll have it sorted by next Sunday. In the meantime, thank you all for your donations, your support, your questions, all the love you've been sending me. Sometimes people just send me a word of gratitude for the broadcast, and so they reach out and say kind things. So thank you for the donation support. Thank you for the kind words and the love. And my heart's with you. I know this is some crazy times and a lot of people feeling stir crazy, but here in Colorado, we've just been getting out and saying enough with the restrictions. We're going to go hang in the woods. And so anyways, I'm going to just read this final poem as I end. The poet Roy Khan. Farewell. I will jump onto a lotus leaf and let people call me a frog. from the great Zen master. Let people call me a frog. So, anyways, good night to y'all. Don't take the path too seriously, and also be dead serious about it. So I'll let you play with that one. Have a wonderful night. Love to y'all. Bye for now.